Decir que te amo, pero no sé si estoy mezclando una vez más lo que me das y lo que quiero. De pronto esa ya no sea mi realidad. No sé si es amor.
Welcome back, everyone, to the blurriest intro of Close to Broke. What the fuck? Welcome back to Close to Broke. My name is Kieran, and today we are currently at the Hustler Casino. Hopefully this is not blurry. We're going to be playing the 5-5-10 morning game here. Let's check it out. Let's see how we do. Excited to get in and play in a casino that I don't really travel to too much. It is a 40-minute drive, as you guys probably saw a little bit from the GPS. They're a little too much, so let's hop into today's session and see how we do. I'll touch a little bit on it later on in the session. I came here to play some poker, and it seems like that is nearly impossible to do. I was getting kind of hounded at for having the camera. As far as I know, the Hustler Casino is a vlog-friendly casino. We ended up getting everything sorted out thanks to Ryan Feldman as well as Nick Vertucci. They were kind enough to help me out, and a massive shout out to Sean for getting me my vlogger pass. It's time to get into today's session here at the Hustler. To get started, I'm joining a 5-5-10 game. I'm in for $1,500. In this first hand, the button decides to limp here. Definitely an older player playing very passive. We look down from the small blind at pocket tens. Gonna go ahead and isolate here to $75. The third blind ends up making the call and the button folds. You'll hear me saying that quite a bit today. It's a third blind as the game is a 5-5-10, and there can be an optional straddle of $20. So technically the game can have up to 4 blinds. It's a little confusing, but I think you guys will catch along pretty quickly. We're going heads up to a flop that comes ace, queen, 5. This is a good flop for my range, not a great flop for my hand. Can't be giving up the offensive here though. Don't want to wave the white flag and go on a defensive mode. So I decided to c-bet for a catch-all sizing of $60. Don't need to go too big here. Don't need to go super small. My opponent makes a call, and we're going off to a turn card that comes the deuce of diamonds. This does bring a backdoor flush draw availability out there, but my hand is also not that great right now, and I just kind of want to take it to showdown if I can. So when I go ahead and check, my opponent pretty quickly decides to check it through. We're going off to a river that comes a 10 of diamonds. So a great card and a medium card. It does bring the backdoor flush draw, but considering this player type, I'm not too worried about that. I'd assume he'd probably be betting his flush draws on the turn. And considering that there is a queen of diamonds out there and a 10 of diamonds, there's not a whole lot of Broadway diamonds that are still available. I'd assume any ace high flush draw is probably betting the turn for value after I check. So I decide to lead out here for $300, a pretty big sizing. My opponent thinks about it for a brief moment before eventually making the fold. So unfortunately, we couldn't get any more value there, but it seems like we needed that river card to get lucky in this spot. Hopefully looking to piggyback after that last spot. We got a pretty lucky in that hand. Honestly, like an hour has passed before the next hand, and that's just how slow sessions tend to go. We've been pretty card dead, pretty spot dead, and moreover the game's been pretty meh. I'll leave it at that. This next hand, we look down at ace 6 offsuit here. It folds all the way to me. I'm in the third blind. I decide to just call with ace 6 offsuit. That's $10 more for me. $20 total to complete. The straddler decides to make it $100 more to go, so $120 total. This is a pretty bad spot to just call here, but I end up doing the donkey play, I think, and making the call. Sure, this isn't like horrible, but I think a weak ace like this, I'd rather just play this as a raise fold as opposed to a limp call. I have no aggression in the hand. I don't have any lead in the hand, and yeah, my hand doesn't really connect all that well post flop. Anyways, it is what it is. At this point, I feel probably got myself in enough trouble. Anyways, the flop comes out ace 7 4 3 diamonds, so we flop top pair as well as a flush draw that's probably inconsequential. I decide to check it over to my opponent who's playing $300 behind, and that $300 is jammed into the middle. I had honestly not realized that my opponent was playing so short. He's in seat 1 and I'm in seat 7. It's really hard to get a gauge at these stack sizes. Usually people just kind of leave the white chips on the left side, but it is what it is. I've got myself in a mess, and I flop top pair with a flush draw. It's just kind of ridiculous to make that loose call pre-flop and then hit the flop like we did and fold. So I end up making the call. There's no reason to Hollywood here. The turn card comes a 10 of spades, and the river comes a jack of spades. My opponent pretty quickly flips over ace jack with the ace of hearts and the jack of diamonds. So we were covered in every single aspect you can think of. Unfortunate there that we have to donate some money to a player that was playing fairly nitty, but it's all fair. I mean, it's all going back to the poker economy anyways. So far, this session has been quite the swingy session, and we're only a couple hands in. Let's see if we can't recover from what's been not that great and Now at this point, we're looking to get a table change, and let's see if that changes our luck whatsoever. And we find ourselves at the new table, getting comfy and situated. In this very first hand of note, we are under the gun and we look down at Queen 10 of clubs. Gonna go ahead and open this up at the very bottom of my opening range, probably from the under the gun position. But you know me, who knows? I mean, I might throw like 9-7 suited here in on the oddball situation. Anyways, the +1 player decides to make the call. Everyone else folds, and the flop comes King 8 deuce with 2 diamonds and a club. We flop a backdoor flush draw, a backdoor straight draw, and we have queen high and what should be reasonable range advantage on this board. Although there is a flush draw out there, it's, you know, kind of a dry board texture. Not a whole lot of connecting cards out there. Besides the flush draw, like I said, it's fairly dry. I am going to size up here a little bit, considering I can hold a lot of the strong value hands here. So I decided to make it $55. In hindsight, I actually don't mind going a little bit smaller, but at the time, I'm just thinking to bet a little bit larger to allow myself to be able to bomb it on certain runouts. My opponent does pretty quickly make the call. We're going off to a turn looking to improve in some fashion, and it comes the 9 of diamonds. So it now does bring in the front door flush draw, but it does add a gut shot for my hand. And like I told myself on the flop, if my hand increases equity on the turn, which it does, I kind of want to go a little bit on the bigger sizing. I decide to bet $125. Again, going a little bit above 60% of the pot size. My goal here is to get a bunch of middling pairs like 9s, 10s, jacks to make a pretty disciplined laydown. And moreover, I think we can get hands that obviously have a speed here, like some kind of ace high floats, some kind of random hands that don't contain a diamond. And there are quite a few out there, and that's why I decided to make the bet. Luckily, my opponent decides to make the fold, so aggression is going to win us that one. And it's time to build back here because, to be quite honest, so far we are into this game for 3,000. And we're still stuck after that ace 6 debacle and just blinding down from an hour and a half of playing no hands.
A little bit of a hiccup with security about getting my camera inside. I got this media pass thing, so shout out to Sean, the homie, getting me this so I don't have to deal with the whole nonsense of not bringing the camera in. Anyways, quick mid-session update. Things are not going well. Bluffs aren't getting through. Table's super slow. The game's not as branded, unfortunately, but that is no surprise. LA poker is kind of hit or miss sometimes. Especially during the week, the games are usually awful. Anyways, we're gonna hop back into today's session. Not a whole lot to report. Looking to make some money. We're in for, I don't know, a couple thousand. Hopefully we can get out for a couple more thousands. Anyways, appreciate you guys as always. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and I thank you so much.
So as we mentioned, about 2 hours into this session, I'm finally starting to get my mojo, and I'm getting pretty comfortable with the layout and the dynamics of my table. In this following hand, the cutoff who's been winning, it seems like every hand to this point, decides to raise to $30. I'm on the button, and we look down at pocket 9s. 2 red 9s. This is a great situation to be in. You can definitely just flat here, but considering how passive the table has been playing pre-flop, I think taking initiative here and representing some bigger hands on later streets, or getting some pretty marginal holdings to fold pre-flop sounds like a better option, and I'm in position, so I end up making it $100 to go for a 3-bets. Folds all the way back to the cutoff who decides to make the call, and we're going off to a flop that comes King 10-7 with 2 hearts and a club. This is a very wet board texture. There's a bunch of straight draws out there, a bunch of flush draws out there. When the opponent checks over to me, I don't think I can be betting here for value ever. It's hard to get called by worse, besides specifically a hand like ace jack of hearts or ace queen of hearts. Like I said, there's just a ton of hands that are drawing out there. And yeah, sure, I can probably get called by maybe like a slightly weaker hand, but a lot of these hands have a ton of equity against me. So I'd rather just realize my equity in this exact spot and try to play the streets. So I check it back. The turn card comes the 8 of clubs, so now I pick up an open-ender myself. My opponent decides to lead out for $75, and considering I am open-ended and there is just 0.1% of the time where I could have the best hand, I end up making the call because we're getting a really good price. The river comes a queen of spades. This is where the hand gets pretty gangster. My opponent decides to check it over to me, and the second he checks it over to me, for me, that's the green light. Even if he bet, depending on his sizing, I was positive that I was either going to raise or bomb this river if I was checked to. Well, it seems like the latter has occurred here. I do double block a straight here, which is pretty important, I think. And I think that I'm going to be having a ton of reasonable value the way it has occurred and got to this river. I can easily have ace jack myself and play in this exact fashion. So when the opponent checks over to me, I decided this is the time to bombs away. I make it $450. My opponent says that I got pretty lucky on that specific river and ends up folding. Little did he know that I was bluffing. And yeah, happy we can take down a pretty nice little bluff there. It's always nice to bluff and mix it up for the vlog. My goal isn't to be the nittiest vlogger on YouTube. It's not to be the best vlogger on YouTube. I try to keep things fun, light, entertaining, and show you guys kind of different ways to win hands. It seems like it's been several sessions since we've last seen these bad boys, but here we go. The button decides to raise to $80. I'm in the straddle. It folds all the way over to me, and we look down at American Airlines. Shout out to not them, because their airline service is pretty horrible, but we don't want to go down that rabbit hole. Anyways, we decided to 3-bet here for $220. I don't need to be going massive here. Like, I have just such an amazing hand pre-flop. The last thing I want to do is 3-bet in a game that's not had a ton of 3-bets and allow my opponent to fold if I choose a larger sizing. So in this exact case, maybe exploitative, sure, but I end up making it a little smaller than 3x out of position. My opponent says it's a little expensive for her blood, but she ends up making the call after all that. The flop comes 10-10-3 rainbow. This is a really dry board texture, and it's hard to imagine that I'm getting called by anything that isn't absolutely crushing me, like 3s or 10s. Sure, ace high can call sometimes, but it's hard because we block that. Sure, some middling pairs can call sometimes, but in reality, I'm either super way ahead or way behind. And if that's the case, I want to allow my opponent, who's definitely shown a propensity to bluff, I want to give her the leash. So I end up checking it, but unfortunately she does not take the bait and she checks it back. The turn comes a jack of diamonds, and this does bring a backdoor flush draw as well as an open-ender straight draw with a hand like king queen or queen 9. So at this juncture, I think it's time to bet for value and equity denial. So I make it $150, looking to charge a ton of the draws that are now available. I can even size up a tad bit here, considering how many draws are available, but I do end up just betting 150. Again, in hindsight, I'd probably be going 2/3 the size of the pot, or somewhere around 70% seems a little better. But she ends up making the call, and we're going off to a river that comes the 7 of spades. That does complete one of the straight draws that was available there on the flop, being 8-9 that I forgot to mention earlier. So at this point, I'm just going to play this as a check call. Most likely, I'm checking just to induce here. Like I mentioned earlier, the likelihood of my opponent bluffing is very high, as I've seen her do it 4 hands within the last 15 minutes alone. So I end up checking it over to her, hoping and praying that this is the time she finally decides to fire away. But luckily for her, she has really good judgment, and she's kind of like a cat, it seems like. She ends up finding one of her 9 lives and checking it back. Unlucky for us, we can't get any more value with our pocket aces, but I think we both played it fairly well. I just really don't like my sizing on the turn, but finally happy to be crawling back towards the black. Been a really boring session up to this point, but it's only going to get up from here. In this following hand, I have the double straddle on for $40, looking to spice up the game. It folds all the way to the first straddle, who decides to limp in. We look down at ace 8. We can use this as an isolation, but it's nice to have an ace in a check back spot here. So I end up checking my option. We're going off to a flop that comes 8-6-5 with 2 clubs and a diamond. Pretty much the best flop we can hope for with this hand. We flop top pair, a backdoor nut flush draw, and it is a very wet and coordinated board texture. When my opponent decides to lead out for a pretty large sizing of $60, it's on me at this point, and I feel like I just almost always have to make a raise here. We're gonna have a ton of bluffs in our range here, or semi-bluffs I should say, and in this specific instance, we can be getting a ton of value from a hand that is like 6-7, 7-8, 5-7, 4-5, a ton of really easy spots for my opponent to continue with on a draw. So I decide to raise to $150, and my opponent pretty quickly makes the call. We're going off to a turn card that comes the king of clubs. Really nice card for us once again. Should not interact a great deal with my opponent's leading and calling a raise range. Sure, there is a possibility for a flush draw out there, but yet again, as we mentioned, considering I have the ace of clubs and there's a king of clubs on the board, it's less likely for my opponent, in my opinion, to have any real strong flush draws. He'd probably always just play them as check calls or check raises himself. Less likely that he'd lead them and then call a raise, but who knows for certain. The only thing I know for sure here is that my opponent decides to check it over to me, and with the action on me, I decide to bet one more time for $215. My reasoning here is that I can still get value from inferior hands, as again, I'm still targeting a hand that is a pair plus a straight draw, something like that, or a slightly weaker 8, which there are quite a few of those out there as well. My opponent makes a call, and we're going off to a river card that comes with 3 of diamonds. My opponent checks over to me once again, and I think 3 streets would be a little too thin with this hand. I think it'd be turning my hand, which is really great and has a ton of showdown value, into a bluff. So I end up checking it back, and my opponent is a little disappointed as he shows 7-4 spades. So he flopped a straight, which is great for him and not great for us. But again, just when we started getting onto the right foot, we were getting on the right track, we ended up losing a pretty sizable one there. Unfortunate for us, that's just pretty much a cooler. It's not much you can do about that. But we're going to go ahead and live with what we've set ourselves up with. And yet again, we're on the uphill battle to get out of the hole. By this point, it seems like yet another hour has passed by since that last hand. And again, we've just been pretty card dead, spot dead, but that's never deterred us in the past. If there's a spot where we can mix things up and get a little crazy, you know me, I'm going to take the most ridiculous lines if I can. And this next hand is no different. So buckle up. Under the gun decides to raise to $35. I'm on the button. We look down at 3 high, 3 deuce of diamonds. Pretty horrible hand, but I'm in position. How bad can it really be? I end up making the call. Someone out of the blinds makes the call as well. We're going off 3 ways to a flop that comes Jack 4-10 with a rainbow flop texture. This is a pretty wet flop as there's some straight draws out there. My opponent decides to bet $40. At this point, we didn't hit this hand, so it's time to give up the shtick. Wait, pause for a second. Did I tell you guys that I just don't give up that easily, right? We have some backdoor equity, backdoor straight draw, backdoor flush draw, and we've actually done the same move in the past with value, as well as on the TCH. I chose to make the same move with 7 high on a similar board texture where I raised it out of position. This time I'm in position. I decide to raise it up to $110. I know that on some runouts I can probably get my opponent to fold, and moreover, if I add some equity, I can go bomb bomb. We can figure it out as it comes along. At this point, we're just trying to get this hand through with 3 high. Unfortunately, my opponent is having none of it as he decides to make the call and defend his bet. And we're going off to a turn card that comes the 7 of diamonds. Bingo. This now gives me the green light to go crazier and crazier. When my opponent checks it over to me, it's about time that we go the size of the pot or even larger. I end up bombing it for $300, like I said, about the size of the pot. My opponent goes into the think tank for quite some time before calling. Not a great sign. We're looking to get lucky on this river. A backdoor flush draw will be unbelievably disguised, especially the 3 deuce of diamonds variety. Unfortunately, the river pairs the board, but it pairs it with the jack of diamonds. This is a very interesting turn of events. Yes, this now becomes a very wet board texture, but in reality, I feel like I'm targeting a hand that's an overpair or a hand like Queen Jack, Jack 9, or King Jack. It'd be really hard for my opponent to fold trip jacks here, although it is possible, sure. When the action is checked over to me, it's about time that I go for value. We've ended up here with the 3 high flush. Now that we get here, we're going to have to bet for value. I bet $675 looking to extract maximum amounts of dollars. My opponent goes deep into the tank, and there's some really fun table talk that we can tune into.
Is that a good or a bad river for your hand?
For my hand?
Yeah. That's all that matters, right? I already bet, so it doesn't matter for me.
I mean,
I don't think you're raising me. That's why I'm talking.
yeah, it depends. It's like,
I guess it's bad if you have like an overpair.
I mean, are you savvy enough to jam 8-9 there? I don't know.
Jam? This is not a jam. Whoa, whoa, whoa. Whoa.
It's a lot more fun.
Whoa. Dude, there's like a 900 left to fight for back here. You're only giving me value hands, so I'm assuming you're going to fold. You've only given me value hands as my range.
Yeah, I mean, if it was the jack of clubs, or the jack of spades, I would have called by now.
Wait, so that means you have the jack of clubs.
I have the jack of clubs.
Woo!
Yeah, so if it was
Woo!
the jack of spades, I would have called you. Now, I don't know. So when you asked, was that a good card? That cost me $800.
It's not 800, it's 675. Discount.
Is it 675?
Yeah.
Dude, actually, that helps.
Never mind, it's 800. I don't know what I want to say anymore.
After asking a couple questions, you can hear that me and my opponent are talking, and I figure out what his hand is. He ends up telling me that he has a jack, and unfortunately, my opponent ends up making a really top tier laydown. Maybe borderline nitty, to be quite honest. It's hard to fold, especially because of backdoor flush draw out there. It's just a little less likely that I'm having a hand like a backdoor flush draw there. I don't know, maybe he watches the vlogs and just knows that that's definitely within my range of craziness, but hats off to that gentleman. That's a wonderful fold on his part. Unlucky we couldn't get any more value there, but that's just kind of been like the story lately. We haven't got max value with our value hands, and but the good thing is, in turn, we haven't been getting called with too many bluffs. In turn, we haven't been getting called when we've had bluffs. So pick your poison, right? Session is finally moving along here. We're not getting as splashy, it feels like. We're currently in the straddle. Under the gun decides to make it $60. We're playing like 6-handed at this point though. Folds all the way to me. We look down at queen nine of diamonds. This is an excellent hand to have in your straddle. I end up defending for $60. We're going off to a flop that comes 8-4-4 rainbow, but there is an 8 of diamonds out there. Check it over to my opponent, who just won a massive pot, so he's currently putting away his chips. He ends up deciding $50 is the right price to make it. I end up calling with my 2 overs and a backdoor. Seems like a nice spot to do so, especially because we do have queen high, which can be good here some portion of the time. The turn comes pretty much gin as it comes a queen of hearts. I check it over to my opponent. He pretty quickly decides to check it back. The river comes a 7 of spades. Doesn't change a whole lot to this board texture. Sure, there are some straight draws that get out there, but you know, if he has that, then I guess he'll probably raise me. But I've got to be betting for value here when we get there on the turn. So I end up making it $125 on this river card. My opponent says that he's just got to pay me off here. I've been getting a lot of these spots where I bet and I just don't get called at showdown. So he's going to keep me honest here. Shout out to him. He ends up making the call. We end up showing our hand, and it is good. The following hand is everything we've been waiting for to this point. I won't say that I've been like waiting patiently for it. We've definitely been mixing it up, but that makes it even sweeter when this next situation occurs. Small blind decides to limp. We look down at pocket rockets. Aces yet again in a majestical spot. We've been isolating this specific player, albeit with really good hands, but now we have the best hand. There's no way I have it 4 times in a row, right? We make it $50, and the unthinkable happens as the third blind decides to make it 140. I don't even know what to do here. The third blind is the host of today's game, definitely giving out the action. This is what dreams are freaking made of. The opponent from the small blind limping situation thinks about it for a moment before folding with the action back onto me. I'm gonna 4-bet here. We are heaps and piles and infinite times too deep, so I end up making the 4-bet here for $325. Don't need to be going too massive here, as we mentioned earlier. It sucks that we're out of position, but I want to allow my opponent to have a little bit of leeway and maybe making a really suspect 5-bet. And again, like, I could not have written the story better for you guys, as my opponent decides to make the 5-bet to $825. Seems to me like there's enough money in the middle to make the jam. So I end up jamming all in for what is just shy of $3,000. My opponent snap calls and says, I've got it. And I tell him, wait, how did you got it if I got it? He says, do you have aces? I let him know pretty quickly that I do have aces, and he lets me know that he has aces. How is it possible? How is this possible? I don't, darn it. Even when we get a massive hand like this, we cannot get the full double up, as my opponent also has aces. We end up just deciding to chop it off pre-flop. There's no reason to wait for the 0.5% or the 0.1% bad beat spot. There's no reason to do that. So he offers a chop pre-flop, and we just chop it and continue playing. Super obnoxious spot. That would have really helped us get out of the hole. But for now, we're going to be just around break even or heading towards the profit zone. But man, that is sick. I'd really like to know, has it ever happened to you guys? Aces versus aces all in pre-flop in a 6-bet pot pre-flop. That's pretty crazy. Well, that last hand was an absolute barn burner, and unfortunately in this spot, both barns were burned. Anyways, moving along, we have been table changed for the 2nd time, as that last game has broken as well. This is the last 5-5-10 game of the night, or I guess I should say the day, because it's only like 3 or 4 o'clock at this point. Probably gonna be wrapping up soon, but we have a couple of more really freaking awesome hands that I think you guys are gonna love. So let's settle in for what is gonna be a pretty great exit. In this following hand, there is a straddle on, and I'm on the button. We look down at 4 high, 4 deuce of clubs, upgrading from the 3 deuce of diamonds. I decide to make it $60, as the people to my left are for the most part just recreationals, except for the small blind. The worst position player, who's probably a solid reg or a pro, or, you know, plays part-time but is a good player. The point is to get him out of the hand, out of position. Everyone ends up folding except for the straddle makes a call. We're going off to a flop that comes queen jack 4 with 2 diamonds and a spade. Pretty, you know, not optimal flop for my exact hand, but this is a really nice board for my range. I'm a little wider from the button. I'm gonna have pretty much every suited combination of diamonds, which is great. And when my opponent checks it over to me, I decide to bet $50. Don't need to go too large here. 30 to 40% is pretty fine. My opponent decides to make the call. We're going off to a turn card that comes the 7 of clubs. My opponent checks it over to me once again. At this juncture, it's about time that I put on some pressure. I want to bet a little bit on the bigger size to balance myself when I do have some really strong value. So I end up making it $200. My opponent thinks about it for a second and makes the call. We're going off to the river, hoping and praying that we improve in some fashion. And the river comes a deuce of hearts. I even can't believe my luck at this point, so I have to check my hand for a second time to make sure that I do in fact have bottom 2 pair. Well, my opponent checks it over to me here. I'm going to be going for a value bet as we do have 2 pair, and I'm assuming that we would have probably heard some kind of noise from my opponent if he did flop 2 pair or something of the fashion. And considering I am blocking bottom set, like I said, it's a little unlikely that my opponent would play this really slow with a strong 2 pair. So I end up making it $500, again going pretty large here, to the tune of which my opponent instantly calls. I literally could not get my bet out fast enough before he slam dunked the call on my forehead. Unfortunately, I have to slam dunk this bottom 2 pair on his forehead. He is pretty much in disgust here, not happy about the situation, but kind of is what it is. We got there, and we got max value from, I don't even know what he had. Maybe, I don't know, queen 10 or king queen, but unlucky for him, lucky for us. Let's move on to the last hand of the session, which is quite the doozy. The one thing I will say is that playing as much as I have been lately, it's been kind of a delight. I don't get to play poker as much as I wanted to before the vlog started getting some traction. And now it feels like I'm doing something productive. I go out there, I have fun, and I get to come home and kind of live a dream by being able to upload content for you guys as a really fun pastime. And the connection that our community has, I mean, I don't want to toot y'all horn or anything, but you guys are outstanding, and it's a really personal experience, I feel like. Anyways, we're going to bring this one home with a really fun last hand. There is a straddle on in this hand, which I end up being in. The second blind, or the big blind, decides to make it $80. He has heaps in front of him, over $10,000 in a 1500 max game, which is pretty insane. The gentleman to his left decides to make the call. Shout out to his dog. That gentleman's dog was beautiful and fluffy. The action's now on me. We look down at 7-5 offsuit. Not a great hand, but I am in position somehow in this spot, so I'm gonna end up making the call here with a offsuited 1 gapper. The flop comes queen 7 deuce rainbow. Not bad for a hand. We do flop second pair. The good thing is the initial raiser decides to check it over to the next to act player, who decides to take over the reins and bet $110. Considering we flop second pair with this trash, I'm gonna have to defend this. There's no way I can fold if I'm calling pre-flop and making a pair. Seems pretty reasonable to make the call. The initial raiser decides to make the fold. We're going off to a turn card that comes a 3 of spades. This is now the full rainbow board texture out there. The third blind decides to lead out here for $220. Again, if I thought I was good on the flop, it's probably more than likely that I'm still good, or at least am very live if I need to hit or get lucky. So I end up making the call, and I won't lie, I do have some mischievous and devious intentions going to this river. And the river comes out an ace of hearts. This is a really great card, I think, for my range. Sure, there's some chance it can help him, but I really doubt my opponent is double barreling with a hand like ace deuce or ace 5, especially because there is no flush draw out there. It's just hard to imagine that any type of ace is really double barreling here. The odd part of the situation is my opponent decides to lead out for the same bet of $220. To me, this is an egregious sign of weakness. Players are hardly ever balanced in this spot, especially recreationals. So I take this as a green light to go crazy. We've been saving this crazy button for all day. This is the spot we're going to use it. I end up jamming all in for around $1,200 effective. My opponent has about $1,000 behind this $220 bet. He is really upset about that and ends up making a pretty aggressive fold. Luckily for us, we were obviously bluffing. He ended up saying under his breath that he had pocket eights, and unfortunate for him, we do end up taking that one down. And what was a pretty weird session throughout the middle of it, we ended up really turning on the burners at the end of the session, getting some pretty favorable runouts and making some really big bluffs. Nothing feels better than getting out of a hole that you dig yourself in early on and booking a really solid day of profit. Anyways, that does it for this session here. Let's get over to the post-session version of me to let you guys know how we did and talk about the numbers.
Just like that, that'll do it for today's session. We're going to be heading home now. Nice to come out to the sun, and it feels nicer to come out to a win. Small win today. We'll get to the numbers in a brief moment, but again, I just want to let you guys all know thank you for everything. The support has been honestly unbelievable. and I owe you guys a world and moreover. So as the channel continues to grow, I'm gonna keep getting better and better ideas to give away and do stuff to give back. And if you guys have any ideas, always let me know in the comment section down below. If you haven't already, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. It goes such a long way in helping our little community grow. We were into today's session for 3,000 and out for just shy of 4,200. So a little bit under a $1,200 win. I'll take it. We were in for quite a bit, and luckily to claw out of that and book a nice solid profit, especially coming off of the not very great performance on Friday. Today we ran a little better at the end of the session, obviously, and then made some really nice bluffs. I think playing aggressive is going to be a benefit to me and also kind of a hindrance. Either way, I appreciate you guys as always. Sorry, we got a beautiful Harley just rolling down the street there. Quickly, what do you guys think about Harleys? I have a Sportster 48 right now, and I'm thinking about getting a Street Glide. Anyways, I appreciate you guys as always. That's going to do it for a session here at the Hustler Casino. I appreciate you guys. Stay happy, stay healthy. More importantly, we're going to the tables, y'all. Deuces.
No siento lo que sientes vos. Toma la actitud.